Welcome back, everyone, to Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. If you're wondering how to hide processes in memory, you tuned into the right segment. Here with me to talk about it is Frank Block, a security researcher at ERNW Research. Frank, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. Frank, what kind of piqued your interest about providing anti-forensic techniques in memory processes?
Sorry again?
Like what made you interested in doing the research into anti-forensic techniques in memory?
It was kind of the road for my last research where I investigated PTEs in order to find executable memory and did a quite amount of time looking into different types of PTEs and their states. And then at some point I came up with an idea of maybe trying to change tamper with them. A colleague of mine, so the research I did together with three other colleagues, Ralf Palutke, Patrick Reichenberger, and Dominik Stripajka. And Ralf in particular had the same idea, the same point of time more or less, so it was a coincidence. And we started doing the research together. So, and we had just this idea to tamper with this information in order to hide the memory. I mean, the idea itself was not that big, but the effects of it were quite good. So it looked very fine. And then we decided to do it larger research, doing some proof of concept implementations, trying different tools and live analysis. And yeah, from that, we did the full research, the paper, and then also the talk.
Is it about evading the tools, like you mentioned, Volatility and Rekall? Is it about evading the tools, or is it more about the techniques like in memory itself?
It began with evading the tools, so the live tools and also the forensics tools. But at a certain point of time, I was then more interested in how to detect those attacks. What kind of information are there in order to find something fishy going on in the memory segment? So it's more or less both sides that were interesting to us.
That's interesting. Talk at like a high level at all the different methods, because you uncovered a bunch of different methods, right, for hiding in memory, essentially.
Yeah. So the first one that I introduced in the talk was, as I said earlier, the PTEs.
Now,
so
I'm sorry, Frank. What's PTEs?
Oh, sorry. The page table entries. So in the process of translating a virtual address to a physical one, so that you process the virtual address space. You have the DLLs and the heap and stack and so on, and those are all referenced with a virtual address. And in the process of translating that into a physical page where the actual memory is residing, there come the PTEs in play. So at a certain point in time, the virtual address translates to a PTE, which contains the reference to the actual physical page in the RAM where the information is residing. And this PTE has this reference, and we are changing this reference and let it point to a benign page. So the malicious page is not anymore pointed to by the PTE, but it's pointing somewhere else, somewhere benign, where maybe just some couple of A's are residing or null bytes or whatever. And this is one of the techniques that we did used in order to hide the memory.
So you basically lied about the pointer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other technique was a little bit similar, and there we did not change the PTEs, but we used another structure which is describing virtual memory. Those are describing the areas. So if you think about the DLLs and the heap and the stack in your memory, those are the boundaries where it starts and where it ends are described by, we are calling them memory area structures. So they have a start and an end pointer, and we did just tamper with them. And the good part about that, it's easy to do. You don't have to undo the hiding all the time in order for the malicious memory to execute. And it was still quite effective because most of the tools rely on those MAS structures in order to find memory, because it would be too time consuming to enumerate all the PTs all the time. So it's an efficiency reason to examine those, but in the end, if you are manipulating them, then you miss some data.
That's awesome.
And the last, I'm not sure if going to the last one too, but the last one was using shared memory. So the idea was that shared memory is normally used to transfer data from one process to another. And they are normally mapped into a virtual address space. So you have more or less two sides to the shared memory. At the one hand, you have this shared memory, which is residing more or less inside the operating system, and each process can have an access to it. It can map it into its virtual address space, but until it maps it into its virtual address space, it's not visible there. It has normally a handle to it, so it has some handle to the shared memory segment, which is somewhere in the operating system, but it's not mapped, so it's not accessible with the virtual addresses. Only if we map it into our address space, it is visible. And the idea was to keep it unmapped as long as we don't need it, and just quickly and shortly map it as long as we want to execute our shellcode or whatever, and then unmap it again. And the effect was that mostly none of the tools, or in this case, almost all, did not find the memory as long as it was unmapped, but it was still in the memory. So we didn't have to rewrite it. It was there, but just not visible for the tools.
Could the tools look for unmapped memory, or is that also kind of an intensive process?
No, that's actually quite simple. We also did create a Volatility and Rekall plugin to do that. So there's a tool out there. You could also do it with WinDebug. I was told, and I'm sorry for that, I forgot to talk about that in my talk and in the paper because I wasn't aware about this research. Jimmy Butler already did some research on getting the hands on the section objects, which is more or less the way to detect the shared memory. So there was also already some research on that. So it's possible, definitely possible. And Redline Memorize might already be capable of doing that. I will have a look at it later on. But yeah, there are tools to do it.
So are the tools for analysis of memory being updated to detect these anti-forensic techniques, or are there still gaps?
The gaps are still there. There are now new plugins. So for Rekall and Volatility, there are new plugins. I'm not sure if to call it a gap because the tools work as intended, more or less, because it depends on the purpose of the tool, because most of the tools are intended to dump the currently mapped memory. And in that case, they are doing what they are supposed to do. We always find a way around those dumping tools. So it's not a flaw in this process from my perspective. It's just a way to hide from this type of dumping.
Have you discovered malware today using any of these techniques, or these new techniques that maybe we just haven't found the malware because it is hiding and has anti-forensic techniques?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, but doing the false positive investigations, I also mentioned it shortly in the talk. I found that Chromium at some point in time ends up in a place where it has memory hidden, similar to the MES remapping. So one of our techniques where we did it with kernel level access, it seems like Chromium does something which will result in a similar state as our hiding. So that's something that I want to have a deeper look at, because if we can do that without kernel level access, then we would have a way to do it without any access. But I'm not aware of any malware that is doing it currently now.
Well, that's interesting, because with Chromium in user land, you could use its already hidden memory, basically, right?
For example, I mean, the problem would be that they are using it. So if you are overriding it, then maybe the Chromium crashes and then the memory is gone.
Right.
But if you find how it ends up at this point, then we could, definitely use it.
That's awesome. And so you have proof of concepts where you actually are executing payloads inside of memory and creating C2 channels.
We created proof of concept for all the techniques for Windows and Linux. Those are available at the GitHub repository that is in the slides. I can also post the link here later on. That's no problem. And I also created an advanced version for the shared memory scenario, which is controllable with a command and control server. So if you want to play with that, it's all up in the GitHub repository. So just grab it from there and play with it. Fantastic.
And Frank, when is your talk?
The talk was already yesterday.
Oh, okay. So you gave it yesterday.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Yeah, I actually see the link to GitHub in our show notes, so folks can go play around with that. Are you concerned about the balance between, like, now attackers are going to know about these techniques, but also defenders are? I guess it kind of levels the playing field, right?
Yeah, I mean, the access level for doing the first two techniques is you need root kill kernel level access. So the boundary is pretty high. The third technique, not sure, it might be interesting for the attackers, but now you get also the tools to find it. I'm also planning to do a little bit of research on how to do it maybe live, that you are maybe, for example, on Windows able to use a PowerShell script in order to find it. So I think the awareness that now you know how to find it wouldn't make it maybe that interesting for attackers to use it. And even if they would do it, then you would know how to find it. So I would say the risk is not that high.
How constrained on space would your payloads be with some of these techniques?
You mean in a buffer overflow scenario where you have to pull it into the buffer, or
like if I'm finding these places to hide in memory, are there space constraints that would slow you down? Or
you can I mean, there are different ways to set the memory up in a way that you can use like megabytes, gigabytes, so they are not really constraints. I mean, with a shared memory scenario, you can create a shared memory segment which is like 1 gigabyte or more. And with the PTEs, you would either use already existing memory, then you would have to triage what you can use and what you maybe don't want to use. But it's more or less not restricted in any way.
Yeah, gotcha. Outstanding. That's awesome stuff, Frank. Thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly. And links to the resources from the segment are in the show notes, including the GitHub repository. Thanks again, Frank.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too. With that, we'll take a short break, come back with more interviews. Stay tuned.